to Diving Deeper Discussions. My name is John Wood. I'm your regular host for this monthly series of discussions that's based typically on an article or a book review that's published in the ASA Journal, Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. But as you know, during the summer, we have our annual meeting, and then we either proceed or follow that by an interview with one of our plenary speakers. And a month ago, we had our first, and we're having our second today, in thinking about leadership and caring for the earth and the particular challenges that are faced in sustaining food production around the world. So we continue a conversation that we started in Denver at the ASA 2025 annual meeting on the power of partnerships to transform our world. Our guest is plenary speaker Abram Bicksler. Abram is the president and the CEO of ECHO. Welcome, Abram. Good to see you.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Greetings, everyone.
All right. Well, as you know, folks, we were going to open up these questions in a minute, but I'm going to begin, as we typically do here, with a few interview questions and kind of getting to know Abram. He and I actually are fairly new to each other, just met for the first time this summer, a few months ago, 2 months ago. And so it's a chance to get to know each other a little better. So we'll do that. And then we will have an open mic as we've done in the past. If you look down on the bottom of your screen, typically in the Zoom screen, you're going to find a function there in the reactions. And under the reactions area, you should find a capacity to do raised hand, or on your view, it may be somewhere, but we'll use that raised hand function, and that'll signal me to let you unmute and ask your question. So that's how we'll go forward. So Abram, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself, because I'm guessing that you're a young man compared to an old man like me, an older guy. But I know a little bit about your journey. So why don't you just start with your educational journey, or let me give you an option, or your faith journey, if that leads to education, whichever one you want to start with, okay?
All right. That sounds great. Well, hello, everyone. They're actually intertwined, so I'll kind of just chronologically go through and share a little bit about myself. So actually, because we're talking about agriculture and food systems today, I actually am the first generation to grow up off farm. So both my parents grew up in Northern Illinois on small, diversified family farms. And I grew up as a city boy in the middle of Illinois in Peoria, and was born into a Christian family. My parents were also first generation believers. And so I fell in love with landscaping actually in high school. I was working for a neighbor lady down the street in Illinois, and got some perennials that she went around her garden, cut them up, put them in a wheelbarrow in June, which is a terrible time to transplant perennials if you know that climate. But I did it, and I thought they all died. That shows you what I knew. I thought they all died, but I kept watering them faithfully. And then the next spring, I had a ready-made garden, and so I was hooked when all those perennials came back. And I wanted to do landscape architecture, so I started designing gardens. I ended up trying to decide between Wheaton and Taylor. If you know those, one's in the city, one's in the countryside. Ended up at Taylor. My faith journey is that the closest thing Taylor had to landscape architecture, as you can imagine, was environmental science and biology. So not really knowing what environmental science was, I signed up for that. And that first semester, I took an introduction to environmental science. Some of you might know Nebel and Wright. That was our textbook. This was 1998. So there was a lot going on. I mean, sustainability was just kind of coming to the forefront. Big thing was the ozone layer, and the Montreal Protocol had just really kind of come into effect. And so, go ahead, John.
So just let me interrupt right there, because we can make some connections here. The Nebel and Wright, the Wright of Nebel and Wright becomes Wright and Nebel, and eventually Wright and Dorothy Boris at Gordon. This is Richard Wright, Dick Wright, who is an ASA fellow, and active at the Asabel Institute. He was the academic dean at the time, or had just completed his work as academic dean at the Asabel Institute of Environmental Studies. Your program there at Taylor was actually comes out of and have a close connection with the Asabel Institute in terms of the founders. And
Yep.
yeah, so you're coming out of a program that's integrated not only with the Asabel but with the ASA, and has fed into that program and background. Got a
Absolutely.
little aside. You may come back to this. Is I love your little story about perennials and failing, because it actually mimics and follows Martin Price, the founder of Echo, one of the founders.
Hmm.
Martin's story of going to Florida, and a northern boy going to Florida and trying to do agriculture. So he's out in the spring, he always would tell the story,
Trying
very
to
diligently trying to get planting and bemoaning his neighbors who were so lazy. And of course, everything he planted died over the withering summer. And then in the fall, all of his neighbors came out. And so,
start planting.
to your point, local knowledge,
Yep.
experience just counts for everything. I just love that. So now continue with your Taylor
Sure.
story. You're in an environmental science with a biology
Yep.
degree. Tell us more.
Yep. So, and you're absolutely right. I mean, long history there with Dick Squires and Paul Rothrock and
Yeah.
strong Gordon connections as well. Ray Grizzle, some of you
Yeah.
may know Ray. So those were my professor. Mike Giebert from Wheaton ended up at Taylor. But yeah, so I'm just I'm a city boy from Illinois. I've never left the country before. Um, Reading through this environmental science and just overwhelmed with the feeling of at the time a little bit of despair, just seeing all the problems of the world brought up. Well,
Yes. Yes.
um, simultaneously in November that year, we do a missions week at Taylor called World Opportunities Week, and Clive Calver, who some of you might know from World Relief, was the
Mm,
CEO for a long time, and he came and was our chapel speaker. And I remember sitting there as a freshman, thinking I wanted to do landscape architecture, and he basically looked at us and he said he showed a picture of the 1040 window, and then he
mm,
showed a picture simultaneously of the least developed window. And he looks at us and he's like, "You are all here from
yeah.
the top 2.5% of the world, consuming 50% of our resources. Look
Right.
at the spiritual and the physical needs. What are you going to do with your educations
Right.
and your lives for the kingdom of God?" And it was like a lightning bolt to my heart because I realized, yes, I was a Christian.
Hmm.
Yes,
Hmm.
I was following the Lord, but I hadn't asked God what He wanted to do with my life. And so my whole career direction really changed and it became how can how can integral mission look where the spiritual and the physical are met, especially in my case through the love of plants and people and environmental science. And so, the journey continues in that towards the end of that Nebel and Wright book, it really gets into practical solutions. And, coming off of the Montreal Protocol, it worked. It's like one of those rare times
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
multilateral United Nations brings everybody together, comes to a consensus and a protocol, makes it binding, and it moves forward. So radically
Hmm.
shifted my life. I actually ended up after Taylor, still took a year to try to figure out what my life was going to look like. Went
Hmm.
down to Fort Myers to go visit Echo. So I'd known about Echo. Martin and Bonnie Price kind of took me in under their wings. I was there for 2 months as a rejected intern, but they invited me nonetheless. The timing wasn't quite right. I had a pretty strict timing.
Yeah.
Invited me to come and just learn. And Martin, we went out to lunch a couple of times. He's like, you know what? It's like, I think God's going to do something bigger with your life. Like, maybe instead of becoming an intern and then going immediately to the field, I think you should go to grad school. So ended up at University of Illinois doing natural resources, environmental science, my master's and my PhD in really agroecology, sustainable and
Hmm.
organic cropping systems. So I became a research scientist
Mm.
after that. Met my wife, who's an urban planner, and also felt called
Okay.
to use her talents and skills on the field. Um, Long story short, we got married 4 years. We were grad students together. Ended up in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and
Yeah.
there's a study abroad school there. So bring it back kind of to ASA. There's a study abroad school called ISDSI, which was started by Wheaton College Hunger alum named Mark Ritchie. Did his
Yes.
PhD at UC Berkeley. He became my boss for 4 years, so I taught study
Right.
abroad students from probably many of your colleges. I mean, Colorado Christian University sent a lot, Wheaton, Taylor.
Right.
Um, so simultaneously, though, God was working kind of behind the scenes. So this was 2009. Echo started in 1981, really operationalized by Martin in 1981 until 2009 had its presence only in the United States, so only in North Fort Myers, Florida. Well, in 2009, they actually started the first international office in Chiang Mai, Thailand. So I got to
Right.
come in for 4 years simultaneously. So I was on a postdoc fellow with ISDSI, but also volunteering to oversee some of the research and the developing of the seed bank.
Mhm.
In the landscape behind me, that's northern Thailand. Became the director of that operation for 5 years. So my family and I lived in Chiang Mai for 9 years total. And in 2018, there was an opening at the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome for an agricultural officer. And I read through it and I was like, it's always good to keep your CV updated and to stay fresh in the interview. And so I cold turkey got an interview and offer. And so we moved to Rome. And
Okay.
for 4 years, I worked in sustainable food systems.
All right. This is like speed dating.
I know.
And I love it. We're going through some really, folks, we're going through some really important things. You mentioned Taylor, you mentioned the chapel, you mentioned the transformational experience. I'm thinking of all the people who have fed into your life to bring you to this moment and their connections through the ASA.
Hmm.
Martin and Bonnie, long term, years and years. I've known them for years in the ASA. Before I really knew their work in Echo. And it's as you were talking about the chapel experience being transformational in your life, I was just thinking about all those faithful donors at Taylor
Mm.
and reminded of the years that I was reminded at North Park College, now University in Chicago, of the same thing. Faithful men and women who would give $5 a month, $10 a month, a regular contribution that they would make to see young people's lives transform. So you've made a lot of people happy, whether they're alive or not, today, because of that transformational story that you have. And so I just
Mm.
want to pause at that and just to recognize that because oftentimes that gets lost. We
Hmm.
go from, oh, I was an undergraduate and then I was this leader of something, right?
Hmm.
XYZ. And but in fact, there's some really important support and mentoring steps along the way. Just thank you for that. Now,
Yep.
2018 and
Yep.
FAO, tell us that because, and I want you to weave something into this. As you mentioned, the Nations effort on the Montreal Protocol, these global
Hmm.
efforts,
Yep.
a little bell goes off in my mind because I grew up in the evangelical community right across North America, and I know what people think about. I'm a 1950s, 60s kid, right? So somebody says United Nations, and you can hear the groans, right?
Yep.
So weave that in because here you
Sure.
are intentionally going with the Food and Agricultural Organization. And if you need to bring that forward, I've said often, we are in a 1960s moment
Mm.
across North America and around the world of enormous stress,
Yep.
multiple stressful factors on all of us and on our systems and our institutions.
Hmm.
So I just want to set that as context for what you're talking about. So tell us about FAO because it sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I actually, if you want to learn more, I actually presented about this very topic. The first year I was back to Echo in 3 years ago. So
Hmm.
I'll put a link in the chat. But there was an entire plenary presentation at our Echo conference that I gave on the United Nations friends or foes, especially in the context of international development. So,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I applied to FAO is because having worked at really the grassroots and the groundswell level throughout all of Asia. there were a couple of multilateral institutions that I kept coming across,
Hmm.
especially having created really valuable resources that were really localized and scientifically valid. Some of those were like the World Agroforestry Center. Bioversity International was absolutely substantial in our understanding about local seed banking, which ECHO does a lot of, but we had to actually operationalize
Hmm.
seed banking in the humid lowlands of northern Thailand. So came across them and then came across a lot of FAO publications, especially probably in their technical heyday of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Um,
Yep.
so when this position came up, I was reading it, and it was really about, you know, technically as well as normatively. And by normative, I mean helping through policies, norms, regulation, creation of
Hmm.
governments, but also working to try to bridge the NGO, academic, civil society life with governmental policy, where there's often a huge disconnect, and the UN tries to
Right.
bridge that gap. So I went in quite a bit ignorant about multilaterals. I mean, we had seen them in the field in Asia. I didn't really know how they work, so it was a whirlwind. Some of my takeaways though were that I I think having thought about and having known a little bit more about the US government structure and some of
Hmm.
the, just the political or the apolitical realm and nature that they've really taken on in a lot of cases where they
Hmm.
so I was fully expecting coming into a place that was, very much like you can't talk about your faith at all, you can't talk about anything personal. And I was blown away by the opposite of that. And I think looking back after working 4 years at a pretty high level, the UN is representative of the 196 or so countries that make up that specialized agency. If you look around the world, most people in the world are family based, conservative, and they just automatically assume everybody is religious or has a faith of some sort.
Some
And
sort.
so, actually,
Yeah.
the UN was a really super inclusive place to practice your faith. I mean,
Yeah.
there were quite a few Christians from the global majority world, and we would get together we were encouraged to get together on work hours or during lunch, have a prayer meeting, just like our Muslim friends would do their ablutions in the bathroom
Yep.
every day and whatnot. So that was a really encouraging surprise. I recognized the the need for good and responsible governance. So I came in
Yeah.
from an academic, civil
Right.
society, grassroots actor point of view. And what I
Hmm.
saw, and to this point too, back at Echo, it's like we see the differences that innovations and co-creation and research can make individual or household by household or community. But for true transformational scaling up, scaling out, so many
Hmm.
of those things are either disabled or enabled by policy. And
Right.
so the real key need for Christians especially to be in places like the United Nations, because I also realize that policymakers, whether, domestic policy or international policy,
Mhm.
the world is way too complex. It's
Right.
way too interconnected. The policymakers listen to whoever's in the room. And so you need to
Hmm.
make sure that the right voices are in the room. So I found it a real privilege to be able to try to be one of those voices, bringing my biblical principles, bringing my Christian worldview, but my scientific
Hmm.
expertise to the table with that. So I would say, I think there's a real and important place for multilaterals as convening, as neutral convening agents to bring
Hmm.
together um, really governments to practice diplomacy. And I think we're missing so much diplomacy in our world today. So, yeah, so I was encouraged by it. It was a really neat integration of science as well as diplomacy and politics.
Yeah. Thank you for that little summary because I want to interject right now because you've just said something I think is really important in the sense that it changes the narrative a bit for us as we're looking at our day and what we're facing. So, little vignette last week, just 3 days ago, Kathy comes in. We end of day comes in from walking the dog and says, "Oh, there's a couple of guys with bicycles sitting in the alley. I think they're doing drugs." And we have a new installation working with homeless people nearby, and it's created that situation. and said, well, and sure, you take a peek and hear the guy's tipped over and whatnot. And so someone called the police, and I see the police officer back there. So I walked out, and my neighbor was there, and several of us gathered around, and we're talking. The officers are done. It's pretty quiet and calm, and talking to one of the officers. Two things. One, I asked him, among other things, after the particulars, I asked him, so how are this Canadian-wide initiative at the federal government, how against fentanyl, trying to stop the
Mm,
egress of fentanyl into Canada, which is really tiny. It's like 1/10 of 1%
mm,
of the traffic. Um, and he says, on the street, here's an officer on the street. The disconnect between federal policy and his day-to-day work. He said, not much. We don't see a change. Then he went ahead and volunteered, even at the provincial, which would be state level in the US, even policy changes at that level rarely makes it to the street to where the
mm,
work I do day by day. And I'm thinking about the important disconnects that you just identified and you tried. It's the policymakers, who's in the room, who's there. And
yep.
second thing is, it may be more important, is you're saying, hey, there are Christians out there at every level. And I think the interesting thing that you're doing in Echo is that it's not just at that upper level of policy, and it connects at a different level. What's happening. I think that's
Hmm.
really an important gap at the
Hmm.
moment that we're not talking about. And the other thing is, it's not only talking about what governments are doing, what is political. We get a kind of um, uh, tunnel vision, as if politics was everything and you could
Hmm.
make every decision and fix every problem. And the majority of these they're about, as I said to my wife, Kathy, I said, when I came in, I said, I know a couple of neighbors who are right within 3 houses, 4 houses of me. I see the faces of other neighbors because we pass in the alley
Hmm.
or on the street. I don't know them. I don't know their lives. I don't know anything about them. I know the I know people in government. I know people in government and on
Hmm.
television, on the news broadcast, much better than I know my neighbors.
Mm.
And so I'm thinking, Echo seems to me to be in that space between, in some ways. So now maybe you want to take us from
Sure.
FAO to Echo, because I'm
Yeah.
really curious, how in the world did that happen?
Yeah. Well, long story short, so I mean, I was essentially including the volunteering for 4 years and the directing for five. I mean, I'd known Echo 20 years when there was a change in leadership. My predecessor announced his retirement, and then we were in Rome. I was really enjoying my work there, but there were numerous people that reached out and said, "Hey, Echo's looking for their next president and CEO. You should really apply to it." And so, yeah, after a lot of prayerful consideration, thinking I did apply, and one thing led to another. So we moved actually as a family back to the States in 2022. So we've been 3 years. So I've been the president and CEO for 3 years. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible to look back at an organization that's 45 years old and just the evolution that necessarily has to happen as the world changes, the needs
Mhm.
change. So what was, really started on 4 acres in North Fort Myers in 1981 and operationalized really by the prices. Now we have 6 global offices and teams working throughout the world. We just opened our Central American Caribbean Regional Impact Center and named Antigua, Guatemala as our location in
Mm,
July. We already have a network of about 3,700 organizations and individuals connected to Echo that will now really, be
right.
proximal to that. So, yeah, the family and I, both my kids were born in Thailand, so they've been spending 3 years trying to figure out what it means to be American. They're always passport holders of the United States, but had never lived in the United States.
Yeah.
So, we're doing that now, and
Okay.
yeah, we live in Denver, so about again with just organizational evolution, ended up
Hmm.
in Fort Myers originally and just really started taking a hard look, like where's the most strategic location for a networking, technical resourcing organization that has far more national workers based internationally than Americans. And so,
Right.
yeah, we relocated to Denver about a year ago with the board's blessing to really just try to be closer to an international airport. We work a lot with a lot of the organizations based in Denver in the Springs,
Hmm.
OMF, Compassion International, Engineering Ministries International, etc.
Right.
So we're
Yep.
here now, and really, truly, we're a global organization, which is incredible to think of an office in Chiang Mai, Thailand, with 30 staff serving Southeast and East Asia. We have a team dedicated for South Asia as
Hmm.
well. We have a team of about 25 based in Arusha, Tanzania, serving East Africa. A
Okay.
team of about 10 plus 10 farmer champions in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, serving Western and
Hmm.
Francophone Africa.
Hmm.
North America team doing a little bit more domestic work, but also serving some of the traditional US based organizations that Echo's always worked with in Fort Myers. And now we have an office in Antigua, Guatemala, serving the Spanish speaking, as well as the so Central America, Caribbean, and even Portuguese speakers in across the world.
This has really been helpful. I know for us who think we have board members who listen in on these chats and lots of experience in the room as I'm looking across the audience, lots of folks who have experience in trying to lead organizations through change. Very interesting to hear this little thumbnail sketch of how you got here. And thank you for that. I'm going to invite people to raise hand if you have a question, and that should push you up close to the front of my screen if you do that. If you have a question for Abram, please use that raise hand function, and then I will keep this going because it's a, it's a fascinating personal history, right, of ASA, but the connections through ASA with Echo. The early connection that I had, and I think many of us had, was when Martin was doing. Um, I don't recall the name. Echo News Notes. It was these small leaflets that he would put out, but it was the combination of those together with his invitation to those of us in the CCCU orbit, in particular, to take up research questions. And I've actually had students doing much as you did at Taylor, students at Wheaton, Calvin, Seattle Pacific, all over looking for research projects. So here at King's University, where I am in Edmonton, we had students looking for projects, and I'm trying to remember, was it Azuki beans and papain enzyme? So it's trying to see if they could uh, convert this protein, which gives people gas. I think it was, if I remember vaguely, it's about 30 years ago now. But anyway, it just gave us a real research program. And what I valued about that was the combination of Echo's push on the application side, the practicality on the seed bank side, actually the doing, but also the high value on scientific research. And so maybe you want to say a little bit about your team and their expertise. Is it because we're likely to think of Echo and say, "Oh, you're an extension agent, right? You're actually, just helping people figure out how to farm better in the field." And there was a big emphasis on that. So
Yep.
tell us a bit more about the science.
Sure. And then I see a couple of hands raised. Yeah, so actually, again, this is, as you pointed out, a natural evolution and change in organizations as we become more decentralized with really the importance of the contextualization has been huge through our impact centers. Not only, the language and the culture, but agroecologically, which also includes the cuisine and just even the local food systems, the market access or lack thereof, which we could talk about whether that's a public good needing to be provided by the government or how NGOs should be involved with that. But yeah, we've actually, whereas everything was centralized in Florida, we still have a research team, so professional research scientists, um, but increasingly our regional impact centers as well have their own research teams, and we still have a pretty strong technical research network connected throughout the United States. Dr. Tim Modis oversees it in Fort Myers, but each of our regional impact center also has a whole cadre of academics, researchers, local, national, regional institutions and universities that they're all connected with as well. So in some ways, you can look at the network and say it's become broader and deeper
And deeper.
because
Okay.
each of the regional impact centers in their context are connected.
Mhm.
We still have research scientists on staff in a number of our RICs, but we're also even more tapped into those local and national researchers throughout the countries.
So that's very helpful because we're seeing a richness here in your networks, and that's an important piece today. So we have hands raised. Uh, Terry, Terry Defoe, you want to unmute
Sure.
and ask a question of Abram, please.
Yes, Abram, I've been reading an article that was suggested by Catherine Hayhoe by Brendan O'Connor titled How Fossil Fuel Money Made Climate Change Denial the Word of God. And it's been quite interesting to think about the headwinds that folks face in terms of getting the word out to evangelicals about these issues, where there are folks who are highly financed and very determined to thwart what's being said scientifically. And I just wonder if you have a comment about that.
Yeah, Terry, you bring something up. Yeah, Catherine Hayhoe is great. I mean, a big part of Lausanne. She actually spoke at Lausanne in Seoul last year, and that was the first time as a plenary there had actually been someone speaking about climate change as a gospel issue. Yeah, I think having lived overseas for going on 13, 14 years, that's been one of the things coming back to the US has just been striking to me is that there are still these discussions, the denial, the deferral as well surrounding these topics. Any I can just about say any place I go, anytime I walk with smallholder farmers in Burkina Faso to Indonesia to um, Tanzania, like climate change isn't an issue. It is just a daily reality that people are confronting with. Yeah, I've been shocked coming back to the United States, to be totally honest. I do see I do see a real opportunity, especially I because I'm the CEO, I do a lot of fundraising and I talk
Yes.
to a lot of donors, and I almost see this as a donor development opportunity. And to be honest, it was one of the things I was most nervous about in this position
Mhm.
because we have a fairly conservative um, donor base at Echo. It makes sense being agriculturalists and
Right.
whatnot. But I've been really just it's been great. I don't know if it's because I come from a professional scientist point of view with a legitimate faith and belief that, I
Mm.
see how everything's integrated. But yeah, I wrote that down. I'm gonna have to look for that article. So I'd say it is discouraging at times for sure. At the same time, I feel um, a moral, a biblical, and a professional obligation to talk with people about it openly and honestly. And I see it as a almost a professional or donor development opportunity as well.
That's
But
helpful.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll look for that article. And I love the work that we do a lot with the Lausanne. Um, Especially through the creation care realm. And I'm always encouraged about the great work that the global church is doing
Right.
in the realm because they're living the realities of integral mission. Creation care, people, the gospel are all interconnected, especially when you're, in our case, when you're a smallholder farmer in the realities on a daily basis.
Yes.
That's a great segue. I'm just going to give a shout out in December because I just confirmed that we are going to have Ebenezer Ibelazal here to talk about theoecology, an African theoecology. And
Oh, wow.
it's not just the practice in smallholdings, the intellectual community throughout African nations has a very interesting perspective on theoecology. And so we'll get to that in December. So look forward to
That'll
that.
be fabulous.
Yeah, Keith
Yeah.
Miller has his hand raised. Keith?
Hi. I want to kind of build on the previous question. concerning climate change. I think the consensus is pretty strong now that we're going to blow by the 1.5 degree target that was set earlier and probably blow by it quite a bit. So how does that affect ECHO's work as far as you're not just dealing with the environment and ecology and climate as it is, but how do you deal with the projections of and as a result of climate change?
Hmm. I think one thing certainly that it has done is whereas, we're looking, we still talk about mitigation and looking through
Mhm.
on-farm mitigating techniques. We're really moving more into adaptation a
Right.
lot and looking at the interconnectedness and the need for adaptation. The realities, our Asia team's working, they were just in Laos, Myanmar, Bangladesh. Some of the most vulnerable um, smallholder farmers on the planet when it comes to climate change. So really strongly moving into adaptation. We're not political, but at the same time, one of the things that we have to do is we recognize that necessarily when you're working with some of the most vulnerable people on the planet, we work through a network of organizations and individuals. Increasingly, it's the local churches, bivocational pastors. Necessarily, when you're working with some of the most vulnerable, then you have to become an advocate on their behalf as well and a mouthpiece for them. I think one of the things that I'm really proud about is that Echo's a member of the Accord Network. And if you don't know the Accord Network, it's a group of Christian NGOs working mostly in international development. They have a long history. Compassion International, World Vision, Food for the Hungry were the founders of it. Well, Echo's been a big part of bringing the climate change discussion to the Accord Network and creating a community of practice where so organizations working in organizations working in agriculture,
Mhm.
creation care, advocacy have all come together and have really pushed this forward. And so, but yeah, Keith, you're right. So we advocate in the ways that we can, as well as we really try to stay abreast of these things. And yeah, like I said, moving more into adaptation, as well as really systems approaches. So, for instance, some of the innovations that have really come to the forefront based on local needs. One of them I shared at the conference, and that was the Blue Barrel water system.
Mm.
And our team was just in Laos last week. Laos opens and closes all the time. It's a communist country. It's hard to be a Christian there. It's hard to work for an NGO there. But it was open. The Blue Bear water system has had a huge demand because water is such a critical issue. One of the benefits in the integrated parts of it is that it uses biochar, activated charcoal, to do tertiary filtration for synthetics. Well, when you're making biochar, and farmers can get really good at making biochar using waste materials on their farm, then you can apply that as a not only mitigating but adapting, because it does such a great job of holding nutrients and water as well. So really looking from a more um, food systems approach. That's one of the other things I think we've really moved into with our new strategic plan. We have 5 global goals. One of the global goals is to champion agroecology, and agroecology really just steps back and says it agroecology is a lens using ecology to design and manage sustainable food systems. It recognizes that everything's connected and interconnected, and resilience is a big part of that. And that brings another good point up is that really moving into resilience as well and helping our network of about 20,000 individuals and organizations move from production, take a step back and be like, okay, what are the economic factors at play here? What are the cultural and cuisine factors at play? What are certainly the environmental landscape factors, but then also what are the resilience and climate change factors at play
Right.
as well? Yeah, great question, Keith.
Thanks, Keith. That is really good. I'm mindful, Terry, thank you for putting climate at the forefront. I'm just reading the Eastern Orthodox Patriarch's fundamental work for the last 30 years. And
Mm.
it puts climate at the center, theologically at the center. And it isn't marginal. We have a very, as you said, Abram, we have a very skewed view of things here in North America. And when you travel internationally and you come back, it is a bit shocking to come back into a conversation, even across the border. The conversation, I sit in the heart of an energy sector, and where
Mm.
climate has not been spoken about much, uh, but that has changed. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I think that's an important lesson for us all to know that the world is not a uniformity. It's not just one conversation; it's multiple conversations. So thank you for that. Um, Thinking about mitigation, adaptation, and change, engineers seem to do a lot of that kind of thing. And Christine Johnson knows a little bit about engineering. I don't know if she's going to ask us something about that or not, but Christine, would you unmute and ask us your question?
Well, aerospace engineering is a bit far from agriculture, so way out of my area of expertise. But I have heard quite a bit of about regenerative farming. Is that kind of another word for ecology, agriculture type stuff? Tell me what's the difference?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question, Christine. And to be totally honest, I had not heard of regenerative agriculture living in Asia for 9 years until I went to the UN in Rome, because the Europeans were really big into regenerative agriculture, and the US was as well. I actually have I do a I do an intern overview of agroecology, and I spend an entire hour looking at holistic agriculture approaches, and we go through what's the difference between organic and regenerative and biodynamic and agroecology and on and on and on. So, in a nutshell, yeah, regenerative. I would say maybe I can just talk about some of the similarities and differences with agroecology. Regenerative, one of one of the things that's similar about is it takes a more holistic approach. It takes a more ecological approach than certainly conventional agriculture. And then I would say, without bashing organic, but organic more of a takes more of a certification. It takes more, it's really captured a lot of market as well. So like there's a strong brand recognition of organic because it's codified in the United States by the USDA, and you have to meet these certain standards. Regenerative is not necessarily codified. It looks at soil health, it looks at diversification, it looks at typically cover crops as well for soil improvement, pollinators. So it takes more of an ecological approach to agriculture than certainly a conventional or an industrialized approach would be. One of the things about regenerative is that it's almost kind of a homegrown approach that was born out of really some resourceful farmers just trying to figure out how can they integrate animals and grazing back into their systems. How can they build their soil health? And so people like Gabe Brown were kind of on the front end of that. So regenerative works at very large scales, which is great. And I think that's one of the reasons why Europe and the United States kind of pioneered it. One of the differences I would say, so you heard the difference between regenerative and organic. Organic is actually certified. You can have organic farms that tick all the boxes that still have tremendous water pollution and erosion and are using tremendous amounts of fossil fuels to till and manage weeds, and you can use organic herbicides and pesticides. Agroecology steps even further back, and I would say agroecology is probably the biggest overarching umbrella because it uses ecology as the mindset, and it really looks at the interconnected nature not only of how we produce food, which regenerative would be really a production approach, but it steps back and says, is there a market? If there's not a market, how can you value add? Are producers making a profits? Are they connected to consumers? What is the policy or lack thereof doing? What's the cuisine? What do we do with waste? Do we recycle consumer and human waste back into the system or not? Do we have synergies and efficiencies here or not as well? So I would, as an agroecologist who worked on the agroecology team at the UN, I would say agroecology is an even bigger umbrella. And as long as these various sustainability, production, economic and social approaches are moving towards more sustainable integrated systems, then they fit well at home underneath of it. And then even within that, you can get into more nitty-gritty, like a farmer that adopts biochar to, you know, add mitigation and adaptation to soil health. Well, they're moving on that spectrum. That's a very specific production approach. So yeah, there's been a lot of great stuff coming out of the regenerative ag movement. I think one of the things I love about it, it's very organic, not in the sense of like USDA organic, but it's kind of it kind of just emerged and happened as a response to resourceful farmers seeing the need to be better stewards, but also potentially capture more profitability as well by reducing synthetic input costs. And the Europeans are even further ahead than Americans on the regenerative ag front, and the EU is actually trying to figure out how do we codify this, and through some of their farm to fork initiatives and the EU Green Bill, they've really subsidized some of these things heavily to help more people adopt it. And I think there's a lot there as well. We don't like subsidies in the United States, and yet our farm bill is one of the most heavily subsidized pieces of legislation that the US passes as well. So, did I answer your question, Christine?
Yeah, I just was trying to understand more. Again, a bit out of my wheelhouse and something.
Actually, Christine, thank you. That's a great question. This is closer to your wheelhouse, I think, than you're recognizing. As Abram was answering, I'm sitting here thinking, he says, what regenerative ag people have done is figured out how to move away from a kind of engineered system where we talk about heat, treat, beat, use, and dispose, right? A kind of one-way flow-through system where you mine it, you form it, you use it, and you throw it away. And that's 19th and 20th century industrial engineering best practices. And what he's just describing is engineering practical farmers who they were the blacksmiths and the farmers and the people who invented all of this stuff. And they're changing their minds, right? Because of need right in front of them. And they're saying, hey, we can do this differently. And now we have a big technical word, sustainability, right? That goes with it. But it's just people figuring out how to flourish on the land is the biblical term for it, right? God wants us to flourish. So engineering, I've often said to my students over the years, there are two great social formations that are transforming the world. And it's not the environmental community and ecologists. And that is, it's engineers and it's business people. Because everything, the technology we're using to talk to one another, the chairs we're sitting on, the rooms we're in, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, all of that is brought to us by design, by engineers who have thought and organized and brought that together. And then who marketed that? Who put the chains together and did all that? Well, we've got to have commerce people. So we had to, I think it's a real sort of Galatians 3 kind of moment for us in the church and the world. We recognize that we need everyone at the table for all of these questions. There isn't anyone who gets left out of God's economy. So, Christine, thank you for that. I see everything as a wonderfully engineering kind of question. And Abram, so you know, the next time you get on the plane and take off from the Denver airport, just thank Christine, because the technology is happening to make that plane and that flight safe. She knows all about that in ways.
I see some models on the desk behind her and some instruments as well. So thank you in advance, Christine.
She keeps us safe.
A couple years ago, we had Abram on our Voices in the Wilderness.
Yes, that was a lot of fun.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's great. I see Janelle Curry has her hand raised. Janelle, we're going to transfer. Thank you, Christine.
I'm going to ask about another term, which is precision agriculture. And then, you know, how it plays out in North America and how you might see it playing out in the majority world.
That's a great question. I don't know as much about precision agriculture, but what I do know is it's being more precise, especially with your management and your inputs. And so, I see I'm a, what I like to say, I got this from Paul Rothrock, if any of you know Paul. I'm a lumper, not a splitter. Paul is a taxonomist, so I'm a lumper, not a splitter. But I really, and as a environmental scientist, ecologist, I really see, there's anytime we're making movement towards more sustainable approaches, even things like reducing our input load through precision agriculture, more precisely applying herbicide. I mean, it's to the point where, planters, GPS guided, um, and
Mhm.
herbicide applications are doing it so precisely that they're reducing the input load substantially. So I see, we're not going to transform our industrialized agriculture paradigm overnight. And, I think it's a great step in the right direction. Um, Everything's within a system, and in the United States, our system since the 70s has been get bigger, get out. It's been subsidize farmers to grow raw materials, basically, and then
Mhm.
the raw materials fuel, the feeds, the fuel, the feedstock, the engineered foods that come out on the other end of ADM and Cargill, whatnot. I don't, precision agriculture in the majority world looks a lot different. It looks like sustainable mechanization, or a farmer going from maybe a animal traction and plow, or even hand digging and plowing, to a mechanical buffalo that maybe one person buys it and then offers their services for hire as well. It also looks like the use of small drones to help with weed management. um, in a lot of these places, there's always an access issue. Do you have access to capital? Sometimes it can be overcome by communities banding together, by creating cooperatives of farmers as well. So there is an uptake on it. It looks very different than in the United States. And it's happening as well. One of the big things at Echo we see happening and farmers really adopting is so much of the disparity and the decrease in profitability comes because revenues are stagnant, but input costs keep going up. So if you can, one, use your inputs better, whether they're synthetic or organic, doesn't matter. But if you can use less inputs, then that's going to make you more profitable, even if if your revenue stays stable. The other one is if you can farm generate your own inputs, and that gets into recycling and efficiency. If you can take animal manure, if you can take green manure cover crops, and you can use as much as possible from your own farm, you're simulating a natural ecosystem, but you're also reducing your inputs that you're going to have to pay for or bring from, a fossil fuel derived source or even a mine, and transport them. So yeah, precision agriculture, I think it has its place. It's done great things. We'd also talk about conservation agriculture, which is, in the US, it looks like minimum tillage. It looks like no till. There's always, I think one of the things I've learned in food systems is that, yes, we want to optimize, but we also talk more and more about reducing trade-offs because that's really what it comes down to. So, for instance, conservation agriculture has done a great job of helping with reduction of soil erosion in the United States through things like no-till. The trade-off has been we've used far more herbicides like Roundup, and then all the effects, and some of the effects we still don't even know about. So there's always a trade-off there. Yes, we've conserved soil, but what are the trade-offs of, and we've also reduced the amount of passes that tractors have to make. So you're saving fossil fuels, but you're relying on herbicide to do it the same. So there's probably a rambling answer, but yeah, precision agriculture is basically just about trying to be as precise as the utilization of all your inputs. That can be seeds, it can be herbicides, it can be pesticides, even the passes, in the US or Australia that your tractors make, where they're Australia, they're going over the exact same tractor passes year after year, compacting only the tire pass every single year. And that's just, they've just relegated that. That's the cost of doing it.
You know, thank you, Abram. Janelle, thank you for that question because it actually is drawing us near the close here of our hour that we typically spend. And I'm just aware that there are a whole series of questions, Abram, that are coming to my mind, and I'm sure to others, that we probably need to answer, maybe through the Christian biologists, the Association of Affiliation of Christian Biologists, maybe the Creation Care Affiliation might want to pick this up and have a further conversation because when you ask about precision agriculture, my mind, as Abram's answering, goes to if you think it's been a lot of change in the last few decades, wait till AI hits precision agriculture.
Hmm.
I, I know as you were talking about the mechanical buffalo, and I was just thinking, oh yeah, what AI does is when I ask a question, it starts feeding me all of these things, and all of a sudden, I'm looking at all of these mechanical devices that people are using in agriculture in various places. Over the last few weeks, I've bumped into a whole bunch of them. I guess because I've been asking about agriculture, and suddenly so with the internet today, the speed, the turnover rate is just enormous. And that's just one area of question that you've opened up. The other one is near and dear to my heart. Abram, I think we talked about this. For 25 years, a psychologist and I, Heather Loy at King's, have worked on food, edible insects.
Mm-hmm.
And FAO, starting in about 2000, but in particular by 2010, had a strong concentration, primarily out of Thailand, but also in Central Africa, on forest agriculture, artisanal, sustainable, the whole. You know more about this than I do, but mixed in that, folks, are a thing that North Americans and Europeans in the past, but in particular North Americans, have largely ignored, and that's that a substantial number of people around the world on at least a seasonal basis, are reliant on insect protein
Mm-hmm.
in their diets. And in particular, as my colleague and I found in Korea, we had Mali, and I'm sure in other places, children are at the greatest risk. Abram, as you've talked about the kind of industrialized agriculture, we European and North American advisors come in and say, you can build this kind of system that works for us and it'll work for you and you can make money. In the process of doing that, you remove these insects that children from 1 to 5 years of age, before they can actually work in the field productively, were reliant on. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have protein deficiency setting in communities where it never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
We have records of this going back into the 1950s, so we know it's a long-term phenomenon, and there are others like that, I'm sure. So, Abram, you're going to need to come back sometime if we can catch a moment with you in the right venue, and we need to continue to open up this question because someone asked me years ago. He said, the environment, John's just not my thing. And I said, well, what's not your thing? Is it the eating part or the drinking part? Or maybe it's the breathing part that's not your thing. And it turns out it's all of our thing every day. And thank you for this hour with us that has it's really been gone by quickly, but has been fruitful, uh, to use an agricultural metaphor and a biblical
Well,
one.
well,
So,
thank you, John. It's been good, and yeah, what you touched upon with indigenous local knowledge and its loss.
oh,
We could talk an entire hour about that, but
yeah,
we could also I could share too about what it means to co-create and share knowledge be when the
right.
scientific process meets the indigenous local knowledge
Yes,
with
yes.
local stakeholders to co-create together. And that's one of the foundational pieces of agroecology that I didn't even get to talk about, and some that echoes doing all around the world.
And we may need to cast that in the framework of truth and reconciliation, which
Oh,
the South
absolutely.
Africans and the
Yep.
Canadians certainly have done to change the discussion, just foundationally change the conversation. So we want you to come back and do that.
Be happy to. We can talk
So
about
yeah,
decolonization in there as well as indigenous local knowledge and
yeah,
honor and dignity. Farming too. It's a huge topic is
right,
restoring the dignity of farming. There's, I mean, huge biblical and theological underpinnings to
yeah.
that.
So I'm sure there are theologians that want to join us in that conversation as well. And that's what we do at ASA. But folks, for right now, I want to announce to you and just let you get a peek at what we're doing next month. We are going to return to our journal, Perspectives in Science and Christian Faith, and we're picking up on a book review that came out in the March issue. And the review was on a book called My Body, Their Baby, on a Christian View of Surrogacy by Grace Kao. Grace is a Korean Christian and professor at Claremont Theological in California. She's written this book. It's a very timely and insightful book, I think. And the story is a personal one because she's not just writing as an ethicist and academic about surrogacy, as she was actually, at 40 years of age, a surrogate mother for friends. And so there's a personal element, not only just an academic element. And the reviewer, the book reviewer, Amy Patterson from Winnipeg, is also going to be with us. So I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation about a significant and important topic, and that'll be next month. So I look forward to seeing you here on Diving Deeper Discussions. Thank you again, Abram, and have a great day.